All right, ready to dive into something massive today.
Lay it on me.
The British Empire.
Ah, a classic.
You know, the whole sun never sets thing?
Yeah, they weren't kidding around with that one, were they?
It wasn't just talk. This empire was massive.
For real.
Like 6 times larger than the Roman Empire. Massive.
6 times. Wow.
Yeah, that's what got everyone buzzing over on Reddit.
I bet.
Someone dropped that little fact, and the comments went wild. So that's what we're digging into today, all those historical insights and debates.
Sounds like fun.
It is. So it's 6 times bigger than Rome. That's mind-blowing.
It really makes you wonder how they pulled it off. I mean, we're talking about an empire that covered nearly a quarter of the world's landmass.
And had a quarter of the global population under its rule. Crazy.
It's wild. Actually, the Roman Empire might have had a bigger percentage of the world's population under its control back in the day, something like 30% compared to Britain's 23%.
But still.
But the sheer geographic spread of the British Empire, that's what's really staggering.
Yeah, that's a lot of ground to cover.
No kidding. And think about it. By 1921,
Mm-hmm.
1 out of every 4 people on the planet was living under British rule. Just try wrapping your head around that.
I can't even imagine. And so many commenters were bringing up how hard it must have been to actually run an empire that big.
Logistically, it's a total nightmare.
Right. Like, you've got to find people you trust to run things locally.
You've got to make sure those local leaders stay loyal.
And then there's rebellions popping up.
Yeah.
Who knows how far away?
Not to mention the communication issues. Trying to get a message from London to India.
Forget about it.
Weeks, months.
Right.
Talk about a recipe for disaster.
One person even compared it to how much damage, like, a single unstable president can do these days.
Oh, interesting.
Their point was, a really charismatic leader can kind of smooth things over, keep things together.
But when that leader is gone...
Yeah, who knows what happens? It made me think, do all empires have some kind of built-in expiration date?
It's an interesting question. There's this whole idea of a soft cap for empires that keeps popping up. Like, there's a limit to how big you can get before the whole thing just crumbles.
Kind of makes sense. Too many moving parts.
Right. And it's fascinating that both Rome and Britain, despite their very different approaches to empire building, they both sort of topped out around that quarter of the world's population mark.
So maybe there really is some kind of upper limit.
Makes you think. Could it be communication technology? Or resources?
Or just basic human nature. How much can one group really control?
Good questions.
Okay, so if their eye is this soft cap, how did the British Empire get so big in the first place?
Yeah, how'd they pull that off?
It's not like they just went on a giant conquering spree, right?
It's way more complicated than that. The British Empire, it was this fascinating mix of military power, for sure, but also economic influence,
Okay.
strategic treaties,
Mm-hmm.
and even just straight up buying countries.
Wait, hold it. Buying countries.
Well, one of the commenters put it that way, and it kind of highlights a key difference between them and the Romans.
I thought empires were all about armies and conquering, not shopping sprees.
Not always. Think about the East India Company. They weren't officially the British government,
Right.
but their economic power in India, it basically gave them governmental control.
So they had the money, so they had the power.
They were calling the shots, setting up trading posts, investing in infrastructure. They basically created a whole financial system that gave them tons of control.
Without needing a massive army.
Wow.
Exactly. So it was a more subtle approach, you could say.
Definitely more nuanced than just brute force.
But you also mentioned treaties and stuff. Big conflicts.
Right, like the 7 Years' War. It was this global conflict that lasted from 1756 to 1763,
Oh, wow.
and then later the Napoleonic Wars. These were real turning points. Britain ended up gaining huge chunks of territory through treaties and negotiations after these wars.
So it was a multi-pronged approach. Military victories, diplomacy, economic maneuvering.
It was.
That's a pretty effective combo for world domination.
It's hard to argue with the results.
But there's also that idea about exploiting local conflicts that someone brought up.
Right.
It sounds a little flan.
Shady. Let's be real, it was a tactic that got used throughout history. And not just by the British.
Yeah.
The commenter was describing how they'd often pick a side in a local rivalry, provide weapons and support.
And then,
In exchange, they'd get allegiance and control over resources.
I see.
It's a divisive approach for sure, but hard to deny that it worked.
Yeah, it definitely helped them expand their influence. And, of course, we can't forget about the Royal Navy.
Absolutely crucial to the whole thing.
I mean, they were dominant for over a century. That's insane.
The Royal Navy was the key to their success. They were so powerful, they actually aimed for a two-power standard.
A what?
It meant their navy was strong enough to take on the next two most powerful navies combined.
Whoa, that's some serious naval muscle.
Yeah. They were not messing around. That kind of power meant they controlled the seas. They could protect their trade route.
Project their force all over the globe.
Exactly. It was a core part of their whole imperial strategy. It's crazy to think how technology is changing the game now, right? Like the whole concept of what an empire, even IS.
Totally. One commenter was talking about continental versus maritime empires. I thought that was a really neat distinction.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Like the Romans, they were all about conquering land, right?
Oh, yeah.
Direct control over vast territories. Classic continental empire.
Boots on the ground.
Exactly. But the British, they were more about naval power, controlling the seas. That shift toward a maritime approach, it was huge.
And now with the digital age, who even knows what's next?
It's a whole new ballgame. One commenter was arguing that even the U.S., with its military and economy, isn't really an empire in the old school sense.
Really?
Yeah, they were saying it's more about international laws and trade, the idea being that everyone benefits as long as they play by the rules.
So less about military dominance, more about...
Influence, interconnectedness. Of course, there's still a ton of debate about how much power the U.S. actually has, but
Right.
it's a different kind of power than what we saw with, say, the British Empire.
Okay, but there's still competition.
Right.
For resources, for power.
Mm.
Someone else was wondering if maybe technology has actually removed that soft cap on empires we were talking about.
Yeah, that's a good one. Like, could a new empire emerge, but this time it's all about tech dominance?
Instead of military conquest.
Think about it. If someone controls all the key technologies, the data, maybe even access to space, that's a whole other level of power.
Whoa. That's getting a little sci-fi, isn't it?
Maybe. But okay, let's zoom back in for a second. We've been talking about all these grand strategies, but
Yeah.
what about the people actually living in these empires?
Yeah, good point. What was it like for them?
A lot of commenters were bringing that up. One person was arguing that while the Romans might have been brutal conquerors,
Mm-hmm.
they did offer citizenship to the people they conquered.
Tried to integrate them.
Exactly. It helped create a more cohesive state, you could say. The British, though, they were much more about keeping the rulers separate from the subjects.
And that definitely had a lasting impact, right? We see it even today with all the conflicts caused by, well, the arbitrary borders drawn by the British Empire.
Exactly. The legacy of colonialism is very real.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just about economics or politics, it's about people's lives.
Their experiences, their cultures.
It's a reminder that history isn't just about facts and dates, It's about the human stories that played out within those events.
The good, the bad.
And everything in between.
It's what makes history so fascinating, right? All those triumphs and tragedies.
It's like a mirror reflecting our own humanity. All the complexity, the contradictions.
Powerful stuff.
And by studying it, maybe we can learn something about ourselves, about our present, about what's possible in the future.
Well said.
I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have the sheer scale of the British Empire. How it grew, the challenges it faced, the legacies, good and bad.
And how the nature of power itself is changing in the 21st century.
It's a lot to process.
It is. But hopefully this deep dive has given everyone a new perspective on things, on the British Empire, its place in history.
And its relevance to the world today.
Exactly.
Before we move on, though, I gotta ask.
Yeah.
Did you find any other interesting tidbits in those Reddit comments?
Oh, tons. One person was pointing out how incredibly inventive the British Empire was. They said we still see their influence today. In art, music, fashion, all kinds of things.
It's true. We tend to focus on the political stuff, but the cultural impact is huge.
For sure. And another commenter, they had a funny way of putting it.
What was that?
They said the British were the #1 exporter of Independence Days.
Huh. That's great.
It's a lighthearted way to look at it, but it makes you think about just how many countries gained their independence from British rule.
Yeah, that's a lot of Independence Days.
And speaking of independence, someone else mentioned that the British ended up paying a huge price to abolish slavery throughout the empire.
Oh, right.
They were saying the debt they incurred buying the freedom of slaves, it wasn't fully paid off until 2015.
Wow, I had no idea.
Crazy, right? It shows that even within this massive, often exploitative empire, there were people fighting for change.
It's not a simple story.
Not at all. History rarely is.
Okay, what else did you find? You got me hooked.
All right, here's a little piece of trivia that I found pretty funny. Apparently, in just a few months, there will be a brief period when the sun sets on all remaining British territories.
Really? So the whole sun never sets thing,
Yeah.
it's not going to be literally true anymore.
For a short time, nope. Someone else, maybe with a bit of that dry British humor,
Yeah.
they suggested they'd have a substitute by then. They even listed a bunch of countries that Britain has never owned,
No way.
joking about starting a committee to discuss potential membership.
Huh, that's classic.
It is. But on a more serious note, someone else shared a link to an article about some Caribbean nations that are seeking reparations from the UK for slavery.
Oh, wow.
It's a complex issue, lots of history there, but
It's still relevant today.
very much so. It
Oh.
shows how those debates about the injustices of the past, they're still going on.
Yeah, the impact of empires, it doesn't just disappear.
And that's why it's so important to keep learning about history, questioning it, engaging with it, even the messy parts.
Absolutely. We've got to understand the past to make sense of the present, right?
Exactly.
Well, I'd say this deep dive has been anything but boring.
Quite the opposite. The British Empire might be a thing of the past, but
Its story is still unfolding.
in a way, yeah. It's a reminder that the world is constantly changing, power dynamics shift, but the pursuit of power, that's a constant. And understanding that is crucial if we want to create a better future.
Wow, feels like we've only just scratched the surface here.
Right. But that's how it always goes with these deep dives. So much to explore.
Time flies when you're having fun uncovering history.
It really does. Before we wrap up completely, though,
Mm-hmm.
there was one idea that kept coming up in those comments, and it really got me thinking.
Okay, I'm all ears.
It's the idea that empires, no matter how massive they get, no matter how strong they seem, they're all temporary. I mean, they rise up, they hit their peak, and
Then
eventually...
they fall.
Exactly. It's a pattern we see over and over again throughout history.
Like Rome, Persia,
Yeah.
all those ancient empires.
And then the more modern colonial empires. It makes you wonder, are there any lessons we can learn from all this?
Right. What makes an empire successful? And what leads to their downfall? It's a pretty big question.
It is. Historians and political scientists have been debating that for centuries. There's no easy answer, but
Yeah.
one thing that seems clear is that empires are complex. Their fate depends on so many things, both internal and external.
Kind of goes back to that whole soft cap idea, right?
Yeah, maybe there really is a limit to how much one power can actually manage before things start to unravel.
Right. And then you've got the challenges of keeping everyone happy. A diverse population, I mean, keeping the economy stable
Yeah.
and adapting to a changing world. It's a lot to juggle.
It is. And empires that can't adapt, well, they fall behind. Sometimes they collapse under their own weight, or maybe a rival takes over.
It makes you think about the future, too. Like, if traditional empires aren't really working anymore in the 21st century, what's next? What will those new forms of power look like?
Is it technology? Economics? Something we haven't even thought of yet? I don't know, but
It's interesting to think about.
it is. One thing's for sure, the world is always changing. And the ways we exert power will change too. But the pursuit of power itself, that seems to be a constant throughout history. So as we look at what's happening in the world today,
It's more important than ever to understand how power works. Right?
absolutely. And not just how it works today, but how it's worked in the past. We can learn a lot from history.
Well, I think that about wraps it up for this deep dive.
We've covered a lot of ground today.
We have. From the size and scope of the British Empire to its legacy to all those big questions about power dynamics.
It's been a fascinating journey.
It has. And hopefully it's given everyone listening a better understanding of how our world works, how we got to where we are today.
Because the choices we make today, they shape the future. Just like the empires of the past shaped our present.
That's a powerful thought. So to everyone listening, keep exploring, keep asking those tough questions, and keep diving deep into the stories that have shaped our world. Until next time.